Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to the US once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel a couple of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, a good few different styles, but if people were to ask me about this brewery, I would say that they're best known for their different kinds of Belgian style beers, and within that I include the more kind of funky, sour, woody type things, and also the more kind of regular things like wit beers and triples and stuff like this. So I guess it's fair to say a Belgian style brewery is the way to describe this one. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is a style that I haven't tried from this brewery before. It's a style though that I very much enjoy, and one that we don't get to review all that many examples of here on the channel just because they're not brewed that widely in Europe. But it does have several twists to it that I've never had within this style category as well, and it is supposed to be a very nice beer, and it's also one of this brewery's latest releases through Systembolaget here in Sweden as well. So many things kind of striking my interest about this one. I'm very curious to see how it turns out, so hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to New England in the northeastern part of the US. We're going to go to the state of Maine and the city of Portland to be specific, and that means that we're going to have a look at yet another beer from the wonderful Allagash Brewing Company. So this particular beer is called Day's End. It comes in at 9% ABV, 9.5% ABV, I'm sorry. This one is an Imperial Red Ale, and it's brewed with Lambrusco grape mousse, Angelica root, orange peel, and then it's aged in bourbon barrels for about 2 months apparently, and it's modelled supposedly on a cocktail called the Boulevardier, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but probably not. So yeah, a 9.5% kind of funky sour Imperial Red type beer, this one. So yeah, I can't remember exactly when this beer was released through Systembolaget. I think it was maybe about a month or two ago. Maybe a little bit longer than that, in fact. It could have been maybe about 3 months ago. But yeah, this one just kind of caught my eye because it was a red ale and it sounded really quite unusual. And after you've done 3,800 reviews, you do want things that are going to test your palate a little bit and make you think. And Allagash are pretty good at that, I have to say. So yeah, we'll crack on then and see what this beer is all about. But always cool to return to Allagash Brewing Company and have a taste of something new. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Allagash Brewing Company before, and we will no doubt add more to that list at some point in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging systems. Just go in there, use the search bar, put your hometown, state, county, whatever you like in there. If I review beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the American playlist along with a number of other things, and that's being added to whenever I get the opportunity. And do check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a little bit about Allagash Brewing Company. So, Allagash Brewing Company was founded by Rob Todd back in 1995, and as we said earlier, they're based in Portland in Maine in New England. I think Portland, or Maine rather, is the northeasternmost state in the whole of the US actually. But yeah, Rob had worked in a number of breweries before founding Allagash, and at that time he recognised that Belgian beers were particularly hard to find in the US, and so he decided he wanted to focus his brewing efforts on these. So he established a small 15-barrel brewery and began brewing the Allagash White in the summer of 1995, and this beer gained traction over time and won quite a few medals. But a little bit later on, in 1999, Jason Perkins joined the brewery, and he started to introduce other styles to the brewery, and then later in 2004 they started experimenting with barrel aging, and of course it's this that's really helped Allagash kind of make their name, if you like. These old school Belgian style beers, both kind of regular and funky and woody, if we can call them that. But a little bit later on in 2005 they started their experimentations with mixed fermentation, and then in 2007 Rob travelled to Belgium with a group of now well-known American brewers, and it was this that inspired him to install a cool ship in the brewery, and this meant that Allagash became the first brewery in the US to brew Belgian style beers with Belgian style spontaneously fermented style beer, I guess we could say. My English isn't working well today. But all this activity meant that they had to expand, and so in 2010 they moved into a new building that they built next door to the original brewery, which also had a larger tasting room, and they've basically been gradually expanding their brewing infrastructure and their barrel program over the last few years. Today they produce around 100,000 US barrels of beer per year, which equates to about 16 million litres in the metric system, and they're distributing to about 17 different states, according to the website. But as of June 2023, these guys have produced around 210 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. There will, of course, there will be several different vintages of a number of these beers, because they do produce the same thing every, they do produce quite a few of their beers every year, and play about with the recipes and things a little bit. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Allagash Brewing Company. I do hope to visit Portland in Maine at some point and have a little look at their tap room and things. There are a number of very good breweries, such as like Bissell Brothers and Maine Brewing Company and things that are based in Portland these days. So definitely a city that I need to go and check out, I have to say. But yeah, that's everything I can really tell you about Allagash Brewing Company for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, though, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's that. I'm trying to remember back to the first time I reviewed an Allagash beer, and I think it might well have actually been the Allagash White, and I'm sure we reviewed the Black at some point as well, but it was actually my parents who got me a bottle of Allagash back in like 2016 or something like that. They went over and did a wee tour around New England, but that's something that I still need to do, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in September. But yeah, cool to get always. I think it was a few years until recently since we had reviewed some Allagash beers. But yeah, always cool to try new stuff from these guys. But let's have a little look at this one then and see what it's all about. I'll just have a wee look at the artwork on this one before we open up. As you can see, the Allagash symbol is the same. The artwork on this one, though, is a little bit different because it is a different beer. You can see the little top label on this one, which I do like. A number of American breweries do this, and there you can see the Allagash Brewing Company bottle cap on this one as well. So like we said earlier, this one comes in at 9.5% ABV. It's an Imperial Red Ale that's been brewed with Lambrusco grape mousse, Angelica root and bitter orange. I thought it was orange peel, maybe that was one of the older ones, but then it's aged for 2 months in bourbon barrels. So yeah, this should be really quite interesting. As you'll know if you've watched the channel for any length of time, I'm a huge fan of the American Imperial Reds. In fact, one of the best ones I ever had within that category was called First Blood from 8 Wire Brewing Company down in New Zealand. It was absolutely beautiful. New Zealand hopped American style Imperial Red. But yeah, always cool to try new Imperial Red ales, and that was why this one just caught my eye. But like we say, 9.5% ABV. Let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. So, a little bit of smoke on the opening there, but not too much. And we'll just stick this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. This does look very nice, actually. So, let me just put the bottle down and place it so that my OCD is happy. But yeah, you can see this one does look very nice. Before the head disappears then, we can see that this one has poured with about just over a half finger of a frothy, I would say perfect white head. That's fading away to be a very thin foamy layer though, and you've got that nice kind of thicker ring just around the very edge of the glass. You can see the bubbles on this one. There's a mix of kind of small foamy bubbles in there and more medium-sized things. But yeah, colour-wise, this one's quite interesting. It actually looks a little bit more like a West Coast double IPA. I'm used to the American Imperial Reds being a little bit redder than this, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'd say a lovely kind of deep amber colour, this one. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or adjuncts you put into the beer will affect it as well. When it comes to a beer that's this light in colour, I'm guessing the orange peel and other things could play a role in determining the colour of this one. The adjuncts in the barrel will actually make the appearance of this one. I'm kind of surprised at how sort of light and orange it is, but if you've got bitter orange in there, it would kind of would kind of make sense, to be honest with you, that it has a little bit more of an orangey colour rather than being a deeper, more sort of ruby colour as well. But yeah, looks the part, this one. As I say, it looks a little bit more like a kind of West Coast double IPA than an American Imperial Red, at least based on my prior experiences. But of course you do have a spectrum of colours that you'll find from these beers. So yeah, let's have a wee look at the aroma of this one and see how we get on. The only other thing we can say about this beer is that it has a little bit of natural haze to it, and I can see a little bit of suspended particle in this one, which is, considering how long I've had this beer and that it's been in the fridge for a wee while, that's not a surprise, to be honest with you. But yeah, it certainly does look very nice, this one. So yeah, not too much visible carbonation, just one or two big bubbles down here and a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head, which has incidentally faded away to be a very thin foamy layer. Let's move on to the aroma then and see what this beer has in store for us. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to say straight away, this beer has a very, very mild aroma. It's not one that kind of jumps out the glass at you. Yeah. I remember this about a number of the Allagash beers though. They tend to be like just kind of nice and drinkable, and a lot of the times with the Allagash beer, I think that the best part of the flavour always comes in the aftertaste. They're not kind of big and bold in the actual, how do you say, the foretaste or whatever. And they're not, these ones, for me, the Allagash beers, it's always about how they kind of mellow out, I would say. But this one smells lovely. You've got the bit of woodiness in there. It really is quite a mild aroma, this one. But it's very, very nice, actually. It's very pleasant. So, yeah. Where do we start with this one, then? The backbone of the beer, you can absolutely smell a little bit of that kind of smooth American oak coming out of this one. As I've said, you know, European oak compared to American oak, the European one for me is always a little bit kind of drier and has a little touch of almost like spicy character to it, which the American oak, especially from the bourbon barrels, is very, very smooth, and it's got a little bit of vanilla to it, and you absolutely get that out of this beer. But you have to remember as well that the American oak tree is a different species to the European oak tree. The leaves are completely different from what I remember as well. I was always quite into, you know, I always was interested, since I play guitar and drums and stuff like this, I've always been interested in different kinds of wood and trees and stuff like this. But, yeah, the woody backbone of this beer is lovely, that smooth American oak, the little bit of vanilla, and you can smell just a little bit of that American bourbon sugar. I mean, compared to the Scotch whiskies, the American bourbons are always a little bit sweeter, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, above the kind of woody character and the bourbon brown sugar, you do get a little bit of a kind of bread crusty note out of this one, like a fresh wholemeal brown bready bread crust, and above that you have a little bit of a kind of sweet wholemeal brown bread. Yeah, so brown bready bread crust, wholemeal brown bread, and then above that you have you start to get a few other things in there as well. I have to admit, I'm not really too familiar with, Angelica root, to be honest with you. I don't think I've ever even heard of that, so I'm curious to see how that is in the flavour. But I guess it's going to have a kind of similar effect to what, say, coriander can have in Belgian wit beers. So because you can smell a little bit of an almost like slightly sweet potato-ish aroma in this one. So like I say, you've got the bread crust, a wholemeal brown bread, and there's almost just a little bit of a kind of sweet potato-y type note to this one as well, which I'm guessing is coming from that from the root. But above that, you start to get the brown sugary notes, and for me, it's got a kind of leathery character to it. There's a little bit of that leatheriness in there, but that's not from a longer wort boil. It's actually a very light leathery character. But then you get a whole bunch of, you know, like Werther's Original, butter candy, butterscotchy type note out of this one. There maybe is a wee tiny little bit of a straight up sweet caramel, but not too much. And then there's also a bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuit, if you like, although the Americans would call that cookie, I would think. But yeah, the aroma that you get out of this beer is pretty interesting, I have to say. yeah, I mean, I think that covers everything we need to say about the sort of malty and kind of yeasty and woody side of this beer, actually. On the hoppy side of things, there is a little bit of hop character to this one, and obviously at 9.5% ABV, you probably could age this one for a wee bit if you really wanted to. It's a bit easier with darker beers and barley wines and stuff like this. But yeah, with a number of these kind of sour beers, you can age them and let them mellow out and things like that, and they will, within the first couple of years, drink really nicely, but you can't, I mean, some of them will age differently in comparison to others. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things, you are still getting a little bit of hoppy character out of this one. For me, there's a little bit of earthiness, there's a little bit of herbal character in there. You do get the remnants of a slightly floral note as well, and there's some nice grassiness. But yeah, of course, the longer you keep this beer, the more that's going to drop out. I don't know if this one actually has a bottled date on it as well, because obviously I'll be drinking this one. Quite a bit later than the Americans would. It does say on the back here on the importer's label, it's been imported to Sweden by great brands in any case. But yeah, this one, it says drink before the end of 2023. So yeah, but it doesn't have. Usually the American bottles have these little laser things that tell you when it was bottled on, but not this one as far as I can see. But anyway, yeah, this one you could, as I say, you could probably age it a little bit more if you wanted to, but I think we've covered what we get out of the green component and the aroma here. So on the on the fruity side of things, you can smell a little bit of the grape mousse in this one. I'd be very curious to know what it smells. You get a little bit of that kind of white wine vinous quality out of this one. But you know, some parts of the aroma in this do remind me of the IGAs, the Italian grape ale. So there must be a little bit of purple grape in here as well. I really am not sure about Lambrusco grapes, what colour they are, but they do smell as if they might be like a lighter purple kind of grape, to be honest with you. But you know, huge fan of the Italian grape ales, so if you come across some of those, I would recommend that you try them. Cadelbrado from just outside of Bologna, beautiful brewery who do some really good stuff. But yeah, aroma-wise, this is lovely in that sense. You can smell a little bit of that kind of nice grapey mousse coming out of this one. There's also a wee bit of you do get a little bit of this kind of sultana type quality, you know, dry white green grapes, which makes sense. A little bit of a kind of oily pear as well. And there is a wee bit of the orangey character. I find the orange actually takes a wee bit of a kind of... It does take a little bit of a back seat in this one, but you do get a nice little bit of oily orange at the front of the nose with this beer. But overall, it takes a wee bit of time for your nose to kind of adjust to the aroma of this one and just get everything out. But yeah, I think this beer goes together really, really well actually, so it gets a big thumbs up from me. I'm really curious to see how this tastes. So as I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy that aroma before you get stuck in, but I think it is about time to have a taste of this one then and see what it's all about. So yeah, this is the Day's End, a 9.5% Imperial Red Ale, but it's obviously going to be some kind of funky adjunct to Imperial Red Ale, but this one comes to you from Allagash Brewing Company in Portland in Maine. Let's get stuck in. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Oh yeah, that is really quite nice. I think we've got this one just at the right temperature as well. I took it out maybe 5 minutes before I started filming, and it's very, very warm here in Sweden at the moment, but obviously not compared to some places in the US and other places. Very warm for us, but yeah, the quality of this beer is really nice. For me, it's a big, woody, smooth, just Imperial Red. I really like how this goes together actually. Very good at hiding its alcohol as well. But yeah, this beer gets a thumbs up for me. Let's just try and break it down and describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. But it's quite an unusual beer for me, this one. But as I say, that's what you want after 3,800 reviews. So, for me, the backbone of this beer is this beer is kind of how I thought it was going to be, to be honest with you. It's one of these beers that kind of gives you what you would expect from the aroma. So we'll start in that middle third of your palate then. The backbone of the beer is obviously that nice kind of smooth woody character in there, but I would add the woodiness that this beer has is a lot drier than the aroma would have had you believe. So you've got that nice kind of smooth American oaky character in there, and that you can feel above that. You can feel above that a little bit of the kind of bourbon brown sugar in there, and then toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you do get a bit more of a kind of oily vanilla type quality as well. So yeah, the vanilla kind of lingers there into the aftertaste, and you get more and more of the woody dryness the further into the aftertaste you go as well. So yeah, above that you start to get some of the kind of bread crusty type notes out of the beer. So you can feel that nice kind of dry brown bready, wholemeal brown bready bread crust in there, which I do really like. I like how that pieces together. So, yeah, the kind of brown bready bread crust that comes out of this beer is quite dry actually. You get more and more of that the further into the aftertaste that you go. But above that, you can feel a kind of more fluffy, kind of wholemealy, light brown bread in there. But there is, I'm guessing it's coming from the root. For me, it really reminds me of like sweet potato or something like that. It's this kind of it's this kind of vegetable-y, rooty type flavour that gets one. So like I say, I'm not too familiar with Angelica root and exactly what it is. But yeah, the beer really has this kind of herbal flavour. And this is one thing to remember, is that in Belgium there were beers which were, I think it was Groot, if I remember rightly, they used to add into these things. So using these sort of herbs and roots and stuff like that in beer to give you a more kind of bitter and dry flavour, it's not unheard of. So obviously Allagash are using an old principle and just experimenting with different things. But yeah, the beer for me, within the brown bready character, there is this sort of almost like sweet potato type flavour to this one. And I have to admit, I don't actually like sweet potato. I just never took to the flavour of it. But it works, the flavour kind of works in this beer with all the other things that are going on. So that's another point of interest with this one. So yeah, brown bread and sweet potato, but then above that you start to get some of the kind of brown sugary notes. So for me, there's a kind of leathery layer, but it's quite a bright and light leathery character that you get out of this one. And yeah, the way that goes together is really quite nice in this one as well. So yeah, I like that. I do like that in this beer for sure. On top of that kind of leathery layer, you start to get some of the brown sugary notes. So it's almost like you've got a circle in the middle of your palate, and you can feel this sort of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy sort of thing coming out of this one there. And that is quite nice. But in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there is a little bit of sweet caramel there, and that's the alcohol. I mean, this is a 9.5%, so there's no real hiding the alcohol content of this one, if you like. But this beer, it seems a bit contradictory, but this beer does drink very well. You would never think, tasting this blind, that it was 9.5% ABV. Hides it very, very well. So yeah, sweet caramel, a little bit of Werther's Original, then that kind of leathery brown sugary note, and a few kind of nutty characteristics coming out of this one too. You do get a little bit more nuttiness toward the front of that middle third of your palate the further into the aftertaste that you go. But yeah, I think that covers everything that we need to say about the think that covers everything we need to say about the malty side of things, at least the middle third of the palate. So let's move on to the back third of the palate then. So, on that side of things, for me, the border region between middle and back third palate, again you get a little bit of a white and brown bready build up in this one, which I think goes together really nicely. So I love a little bit of white brown bready build up in there. Further back on the palate, you get a nice little bit of that. You get the woodiness in there, and as I've often said, the back third of the palate will give you similar flavours to the middle third of the palate, but they just come out in different intensities. So you are getting the wood in there, but it just comes out across as being a little bit drier. You're getting the bourbon sugar as well, you're getting the bread crust, and then above that, you can feel that the sort of wholemeal brown bready layer is a lot more light and a lot more airy, and you do of course get some of that kind of root, sweet potato-y type flavour coming out of this one too. Above that, you can just feel a little bit of the kind of dry Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type flavour coming out of this beer too, which is great. But yeah, the way that does go together is, the way that goes together, I think, is really nice for me. And above everything else on that back third of the palate, you're getting sort of, yeah, you're getting a little bit of a more, yeah, you are getting a little bit of a lighter kind of, more yeast, you're getting a little bit of that more kind of yeasty, farmhousey, bready type character in there. So yeah, like a more airy brown, more airy but woody and crackery farmhouse bread, then it's kind of wrapped in honeycomb. I always get honeycomb on the back third of the palate for some reason, but yeah, it goes together very nicely. In terms of the back third of the palate, then you can also see that the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third, you're turning it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. So that's quite interesting too. Yeah, so I think that covers everything we need to say about the malty and woody and adjuncty and barrel side of things with this beer. The hoppy side of things is quite straightforward. It's kind of similar to how we described it in the aroma. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a little touch of earthiness in there, and as you move further forward, it gets a little bit more herbal, of course, and as you push toward the kind of front corners of the palate, there's a lot more kind of floral aromaticity coming out of this one too. So yeah, the way this beer goes together, I think it is really, really nice. Yeah, so yeah, nice. Little bit of earthiness, little bit of yeah, a little bit of earthiness, a little bit of herbal character, and a nice sort of floral aromaticity coming out of this beer. So yeah, I like that about this one. But round the front curve of the palate, it's definitely lighter and more grassy, and I think that comes out quite nicely actually. But let's look at that front third of the palate then, just to round off. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a nice little bit of a kind of brown bready character in there. It's quite a sweet, light, wholemeal brown bread, and the base of that front third of the palate, you've got the kind of lighter, smoother woodiness in there, a little touch of the vanilla in the wood and the sweet bourbon sugars, and a bit of a kind of smoother, wholemeal, brown bready character coming out of this one. But then you get the fruity notes above that in this beer. Now, in terms of the hoppy character, I think what you're getting here is a little bit of like a sultana and perry type quality from the hops themselves, but the rest of the fruity character is coming from the adjunct. So yeah, you've got this oily, perry and kind of sultana type layer on top of the malty backbone on that front third of the palate. Then you've got a bit of the grapey mousse and then the kind of bitter orange, which is interesting. I've not had bitter orange all that often, but yeah, at the back of that front third of your palate, you can feel the mousse, and like I said, it has a little bit of a more kind of white wine vinous type quality, but you do get a little bit of an almost kind of light purpley grapey quality to it, which is interesting. So yeah, you do get that at the back of the front third of your palate, but then as you move further forward, it becomes more about the bitter orange, and you get a little bit of the oily orangey sweetness there, but it is As I say, it really is quite dry and quite bitter, and you can also feel a little bit of that bitter orange kind of spreading around the sides of the palate as well. And this is one of the things, whenever you add fruit into beer as an adjunct, it sort of, it does always kind of, it really does always kind of, it does quite often take over the, it really does quite often suppress a good little bit of the kind of hoppy side of the beer. So you can feel the bitter orange kind of giving, sort of promoting almost, because of the bitterness, it's almost promoting a little bit of the floral character from the hoppy side of this beer. So that's really interesting, I have to say. I do quite like that about this beer. Yeah, I think that covers everything we really need to say about the flavour of this one. It's not your conventional Imperial Red Ale, but still very nicely done. Let's round off this review then with just a wee look at the mouthfeel. So for me, mouthfeel wise, this beer, it's definitely quite, yeah, for me, the mouthfeel of this beer really is quite, how would we say, it's pushing toward the top end of mid-body, bottom end of full body. It's kind of somewhere around there. The carbonation is very, very smooth. It's got a good little bit of dryness to it, but at the same time it's very smooth and very oily, actually. IBU-wise, I'd be very surprised if this was more than 10 or 15 IBUs. There is definitely a little bit of bitterness to it because of the bitter orange and the hoppy character that lingers there. You do get a little bit of dryness from the wood as well, and some graininess out of the malt base, which, you know, that dryness and stuff that you get in there could be conflated with the bitterness. But the malt base, as we said, you've got a bit of dry woody character, good little bit of smooth bready note in there, some sweet, oily, sweet oily malty characters in there as well. Then you've got a little bit of vinous quality, as we said, like kind of oily but still dry, sweet, fruity characters coming out of this one. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is very, very nice, and it gets a big thumbs up from me. I've really enjoyed this one, something really quite different compared to what we've had before, but you know, Allagash Brewing Company, you can rely on them to do something a wee bit unusual, actually. Yeah, I would recommend you try this beer because it is very different to what you're going to find within the Imperial Red category. If you haven't tried an Allagash beer before, you know, you are in for a treat if you try something from them. It's always going to be good quality. But yeah, let's leave it at that for this one. This one was the Day's End, if I remember the name correctly. Yeah, Day's End, 9.5% Imperial Red Ale, brewed with Lambrusco grape mousse, Angelica root and bitter orange, and then aged in bourbon barrels for 2 months. This one comes to you from Allagash Brewing Company in Portland, in Maine, in New England, over in the northeastern US. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Allagash Brewing Company as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But yeah, that's that. Thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Allagash's social media, and we'll see you guys in another review very, very soon. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.